Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of The Negotiation. On today's show, I have the opportunity to talk to someone who has decades of experience working with some of today's top tech companies in both Japan and China, Gen Kanai. Gen is a Japanese American who has worked with Toyota USA, Sony Japan, Digital Garage, Mozilla, and most recently, Animoca brands. Throughout this discussion, Gen gives us a history lesson on why eBay failed and Yahoo won with an auction platform in Japan, and how Google won in Japan in spite of itself, simply because Yahoo Japan chose them as the preferred search engine instead of the Yahoo US favored Bing. We talk about how Twitter has been such a large success in Japan and that anonymity is an underlying reason why. We also discuss the impact China can have on a US-based tech company through a look back at why, after a trip to China, Snapchat's CEO demanded changes to their platform that their US user base simply wasn't ready for. We end the show with some important takeaways on how to be success ready when entering Asian markets like China or Japan. Enjoy.
Even as of this year, even as of 2020, I would say that Yahoo Japan has a dominant internet presence in Japan. And while Google does control search in Japan, it doesn't do that without the market share that Yahoo Japan brings. So I would say that Japan is not a search market that Google won natively. It's more that Bing caused Yahoo Japan to have to switch providers.
Home to over 4 billion people, the Asia-Pacific region boasts one of the most powerful consumer markets on the planet. Not only is it home to half the world's under 30 population, but it's also home to more than half the world's internet users. It's a market no globally minded brand should ignore, but entering markets like China is no easy task. Just ask the likes of Microsoft, Google, Uber, and Facebook. Times are changing, and with the right partners, doors are slowly opening as more and more companies find success expanding into the markets of the Middle Kingdom. I myself spent 8 years in China, mostly as a venture capitalist, helping early-stage tech companies enter the Asia-Pacific market successfully. This show is dedicated to uncovering and examining successful China entry and growth strategies by interviewing the people behind those success stories. My name is Todd Embley, and welcome to The Negotiation, brought to you by WPIC Marketing and Technologies.
Gen, welcome to the show. Thanks for coming on today.
Thank you for having me, Todd.
Why don't we start with a bit of a self-introduction? Where are you from? A bit about your background, how you ended up in Asia, and so on.
Certainly. So my name is Gen Kanai. I'm Japanese-American, born and raised in New York City. After university, I worked at Toyota in their American headquarters which was at the time Torrance, California, for 4 years. 1 year in strategic planning and 3 years building Toyota's basically first internet infrastructure, both consumer-facing and dealer-facing websites. I then worked for Sony a couple years in New Jersey, building internet-connected devices. And then a few years Sony sent me to Tokyo. And so I worked in Tokyo doing internet strategy for Sony. Then worked for a startup search engine. And then the chairman or one of the board members of the company that was backing the startup search engine brought me over to Mozilla. So I spent 10 years at Mozilla in their Tokyo office. So I opened the Tokyo office. I opened the Beijing office. I launched most, if not all, of the activities that Mozilla did in Southeast Asia and even South Asia. At the end of my 10 years, there was a large project to build a ultra low cost mobile phone using Mozilla software. It was called Firefox Mobile. And I launched that phone with a team of other people in India, Bangladesh, Philippines, Indonesia, I think. Yeah. And then my wife got a role in China, in Shanghai. So in 2016, we moved to China for her role. And I then found a role with Animoca Brands, which is sort of a mid-sized gaming company that does both casual mobile and blockchain-based games. So I'm doing a business development for Animuka Brands.
I want to speak to some of the office opening and some of the country and market entry work that you've done. Can you talk to us a little bit about the challenges of entering East Asian markets, specifically Japan, but also China to an extent?
Yeah, I can definitely talk a lot about Japan. I spent more than a decade in Japan, both with Sony and Mozilla and a startup. So I've taken a real close look at the internet sector in Japan, largely the consumer side, not so much the B2B. Japan is this really interesting and challenging market. It's interesting because Japanese customers pay for software. They pay for content. They generally do not pirate content for the most part. So, for instance, like average revenue per user for a lot of mobile games is almost always highest in Japan, as an example. And then there are a lot of aspects to Japan. So basically it can be a very profitable market if you can crack the market, if you have a product that fits, that's popular in the Japanese market. But it's also a very challenging market. There are a lot of non-Japanese companies or Western companies that have tried and failed in Japan. And so I can talk a little bit about some of those prominent failures that I've seen over the years, and then some prominent successes as well. And then China, I have a number of years in China now, 5 years. There's one example that I wanted to talk to about taking sort of the wrong lesson from China. But I think the main thing about China is that it's really hard as a foreign entity to enter the consumer segment in China for a whole host of reasons that we can go into later.
I'd like to have you speak a little bit about what happened to eBay in Japan.
Yeah, eBay is a fascinating example, and it's now a number of years old. But I still think it's a really important lesson that holds a very important example that holds a lot of lessons for companies that are trying to enter the Japanese market. To summarize, eBay failed in Japan. And they made a number of critical mistakes along the way. Essentially, when eBay was rising, was successful in the US and they were starting to expand internationally, Japan was just one of multiple markets that eBay was trying to crack overseas. And so they had a number of people working on it, I'm sure, but it wasn't, certainly their only priority. And news got back to Jerry Yang of Yahoo, who was then running Yahoo, that eBay was, obviously launching new international efforts. And Jerry called his friend and investor, Masayoshi Son at SoftBank, and said to Masa, eBay is expanding. Don't let them enter Japan. You should start an auction service before they do. And that's exactly what happened. Masa went to Yahoo Japan management. This is at a time when Yahoo Japan was 1/3 owned by Yahoo US. So there was a very tight relationship between Yahoo Japan and Yahoo US, but they were separate entities, so to speak. And basically Masa told the Yahoo Japan team, start an auction service ASAP. Yahoo Japan managed to get a bare bones auction service up and running in September of 1999. Well, eBay Japan, because they took too much time to research or whatever, they didn't launch until 5 months after Yahoo Japan had launched. eBay Japan also made a number of other critical errors. They charged commissions for transactions, for auction transactions, and Yahoo Japan did not charge commissions. So this was a foreign competitor entering a new market, charging customers, whereas the domestic incumbent, so to speak, who had started an auction service a number of months before eBay, was not charging commissions. eBay Japan required credit cards and did not provide any non-card payments. And 20 years ago, credit cards are fairly popular here in Japan now, but there's still a fairly large segment of Japanese consumers that don't use credit cards or prefer not to use credit cards. And 20 years ago, in 1999, the percentage of Japanese customers that had credit cards was much, much lower. So for various reasons, I'm sure there were, multiple reasons why eBay went with credit cards. Yahoo Japan offered multiple payment options, including payment at convenience stores or bank deposit, and eBay had none of these options. The final decision that I think eBay made regarding Japan that I think was the wrong one in hindsight was that Meg Whitman, who was head of eBay at the time, chose a prominent Japanese American entrepreneur, a lady by the name of Merle Okawara. Miss Okawara is a sort of a really impressive entrepreneur who started basically frozen pizza in Japan. She brought the idea of frozen pizza to Japan, and I think eventually either ran Domino's or whatever became the start of Domino's or Pizza Hut. I forget which one.
She had the hero story.
Yeah, for sure. And she was, really well respected as the sort of leading business person in Japan. And I think, Japanese American, so there was no cultural barrier between her and Meg. But she didn't really understand internet, and she was in her 50s when all of this was happening in 1999. She just was not the right person to run an internet business. She didn't have the right background. She didn't have the knowledge about internet businesses. She had networks in Japan, of course, but probably not in the right segments. So I think for various reasons, including the fact that eBay launched after Yahoo Japan, they were charging commissions. eBay required credit cards and had, I think, almost no other payment options, and the wrong leadership. Essentially, eBay Japan was a failure. So in 2002, eBay closes the Japan entity, fires the 17 staff that they had hired over the years, and that was sort of the end of eBay Japan.
What would you say are the lessons learned, to summarize, from all the mistakes that eBay made there?
I think, it's a very commonly known that first mover advantage is really important in the internet segment. And I think in this case, the friendship that Jerry Yang and Masayoshi Son had with Yahoo and Yahoo Japan enabled Yahoo Japan to have that first mover advantage over eBay. I think the other thing is that the domestic player, Yahoo Japan in this case, already had users and the trust, and was able to market their new auction service to their existing, user base, which was gigantic even 20 years ago. Whereas eBay Japan was an outside entity coming into a new market, had to market the eBay name, which nobody in Japan had known at the time, and had to try and take share away from Yahoo, who had launched before. So in many ways, I think it was sort of an impossible task. I think the key thing is that eBay Japan did not invest enough, didn't move fast enough, didn't launch before, didn't prioritize the Japanese market. They probably had multiple markets they were working on. Japan was just one of multiple markets, whereas Yahoo Japan was, hell bent on defending its own home turf, so to speak.
How has Google done in Japan?
I would say Google has done very well in Japan, and I believe Japan is the second most profitable market for for Google after the U.S. I could be wrong about that, but that's my understanding. But the thing that I think most people don't realize about Google Japan is that Google did not sweep into the Japan market and in a few years take the search market away from the domestic competitor at the time. In fact, it wasn't until the domestic search leader, which is Yahoo Japan, essentially hired Google Japan to be the back-end search, that Google could then claim that it was, driving a majority of the searches of Japan. So I would say that Google Japan struggled for a long time to gain market share. They were able to get a significant amount of market share relatively early. A lot of these early adopters and younger internet savvy folks jumped onto Google very quickly. But the majority of mainstream Japanese users still use Yahoo Japan for search. And for a long time, Google could not access those users. So Google came to Japan, I think in 2000 or 2001, and struggled to gain market share for a long time until 2010, which is the year that Yahoo US, which was providing search services for Yahoo Japan, switched to Bing. And Bing had really terrible search results for Japanese. And so it wasn't until that basically forced Yahoo Japan to select Google Japan, Google as a search provider, that Google could then say, we dominate search in Japan. And I was, in Japan for the bulk of the time where Google was struggling. And I have a number of fascinating examples that I have saved from that time where Google was trying different home pages. So the homepage that everybody knows today, this very simple homepage that Google has around the world with just the search engine and a couple of links to Gmail and whatever. In 2008, Google was still struggling, and they were trying out different homepages in Japan, but also in Korea and China. And this is an audio podcast, so I can't show screenshots, but maybe you can put links to some of these screenshots in the show notes. But essentially, Google tried in East Asia these different homepages in Japan, Korea, and China that look nothing like what we know of Google homepage today. I mean, they were filled with links. They were filled with news updates and weather and all the stuff that, you don't expect on a sort of clean, simple Google homepage. And I think, even as of 2008, because Google was trying these different homepages in East Asia, they were struggling to gain traction, to gain users, to understand the market. This was an American company who came in, got an initial user base, but wasn't able to crack into the mainstream certainly of the Japan market. And I think even as of this year, even as of 2020, I would say that Yahoo Japan has a dominant internet presence in Japan. And while Google does control search in Japan, it doesn't do that without the market share that Yahoo Japan brings. So I would say that Japan is not a search market that Google won natively. It's more that Bing caused Yahoo Japan to have to switch providers. And I think most people don't know that, and most people don't appreciate that. The incumbent in Japan, Yahoo Japan in this case, is still a major destination for the majority of mainstream, internet. It's a site that I check even every day just to see what they're showing.
What about Twitter in Japan?
Twitter is one of those
popular, not popular.
It's one of those success stories that should have more business cases written about it, because it was one of those services that would have been popular no matter what. Essentially, the product was viral in Japan even before Twitter launched a Japanese office. The feature set, the core functionality of Twitter was just so suited to the Japanese market. So I would say that the anonymity of Twitter is a key feature. The Japanese market, for a lot of different reasons, really values anonymity. And one reason why Twitter is a significant reason why Twitter is as popular in Japan as, I know for sure that Twitter is the second most valuable market for Twitter worldwide, but the anonymity is a key feature. And they made some key first hires, key management hires for the Japan market that really understood the Japanese market and was able to, execute effectively. And then I would say that, it was basically a product that was perfect for the Japanese market. And once the organization and management was in place, the execution was done well. So it was kind of just like pouring gas on a fire. And I would say Twitter is still dominant in Japan, and is, you see Twitter all over the place in advertising and marketing, on, TV commercials, and, it's ubiquitous. It's a very successful platform in Japan.
Is there a particular digital behavior fingerprint of Japanese users of digital and social that is really, hopefully that some companies are understanding, but was it something baked into that really just helped Twitter be successful?
I think it's hard to generalize across a whole nation of users. But I do think that anonymity is a feature set that is a feature that is highly valued in Japan.
Mm-hmm. In China, in the very early days of WeChat, as I remember, people created odd usernames. They'd never had their actual picture as their avatar. You really you couldn't search and find somebody you might know and track them down, not like searching somebody's name on Facebook.
But WeChat accounts are eventually tied to a phone number.
Yes. Yeah.
Which are eventually tied to, right? But in Twitter, you can have a fully anonymous account.
Oh, true. Yeah. So for the casual scroller,
right.
It was, you could certainly still authenticate somebody.
Yeah. I would say that there are a lot of, like I said, the fact that Twitter can be a fully anonymous, you can have a fully anonymous account on Twitter is one of the reasons why it's very popular.
Can I ask to even drill down further?
Yeah, I think, it's Japan is a very, I think everybody knows, or anybody who comes to Japan will know that it's a very homogenous culture, and it's a fairly rigid culture in the sense that there are a lot of cultural structures around how people speak to each other, how younger people speak to elder people older than them. There's a lot of cultural rules, and so Twitter gives people, Japanese users, a freedom that they don't have in their daily life, to, say what they want, share what they really feel in, in a fully anonymous way that most people don't have in real life. You can't criticize, your elder, openly, let's say in a business situation, or, in school or something like that, but you can on Twitter. So, I think it gives people freedom, to speak, to say what they want.
Okay. Let's go even younger. What about Snapchat? What about Snapchat in China?
Yeah, I think, this was discussed, when Evan Spiegel came to China, but there was a prominent visit where Evan Spiegel, the CEO of Snapchat, came to China and just saw how vibrant and how, vibrant and different the sort of photo sharing, social photo space is in East Asia, and how different China is from the rest of the world. And essentially he goes back to Los Angeles and mandates all these changes to his own platform, because he saw, all these things working really well in China.
He thought he saw the future.
Exactly. And essentially, he tried to replicate things that he saw with WeChat, with Weibo. He neglected to realize that the user base is very different. And the existing user base at the time at Snapchat was just not ready for radical changes to a platform that they were using. A lot of the users revolted, and most, if not all, of the changes that Spiegel had mandated were reverted back to a previous design. I think Spiegel assumed that what worked in China would work for a non-China Snapchat audience, and that's just not true. The markets are different. China is significantly different from the rest of the world for multiple reasons that we can discuss. But I think it's dangerous when a CEO comes to China or comes to East Asia, sees some shiny object, sees some new trend, tries to implement that trend without more context, without better understanding why that feature or that product or whatever does well in an East Asian market. I mean, there are certainly cases where those products will do well in the West, but it's not always the case. And I would say that, if you look at other markets, again, each market is, let's say, other East Asian markets or other Southeast Asian markets or South Asian markets. Again, the markets are very different from each other, and you can maybe take some general ideas from markets in Asia, but taking direct examples and trying to bring a product from, let's say, India or whatever directly to the US and expecting it to be successful, often you won't see that same success.
Here's an off-the-cuff question that may not make it. What was the most fun part about working with Mozilla, and what was the most difficult thing about taking Mozilla into the different markets you did?
I would say the best part of Mozilla, I think most people know Mozilla for Firefox, and the best part of Mozilla was being able to work with the users, with the community, so to speak. Now, a lot of companies talk about community these days, and community is critically important no matter, who you are, for any consumer focused product or service. But for Mozilla, community is really, really important. Mozilla is a nonprofit organization. They have a fraction of the budgets of, let's say Google or Apple or Microsoft, the companies that have competing browsers. And so the only thing that Mozilla has that these multi-billion-dollar businesses don't have is a sort of this rabid fan base of Firefox users that are really, they really love the product. They love the nonprofit mission. They love the fact that Firefox doesn't, make money off of the users directly, kind of a thing. And so being able to work with those communities all around Asia was, I think, the best part of working for that organization. The most challenging part, I would say, are the markets that were totally closed to us. So South Korea, for the whole 10 years that I was at Mozilla, was a market that was closed to Firefox. And this was because of technical decisions that the Korean market had made regarding internet banking and that sort of thing. The technologies that essentially worked in Korea only worked with Internet Explorer. You couldn't do any kind of internet. This is back in the day, but you couldn't do any kind of internet banking or stock trading or any kind of secure transaction in Korea without using Internet Explorer. So if you were a Mac user, you were out of luck. If you were, a Chrome user or a Firefox user, you were out of luck. You had to use IE. So that was a pretty frustrating market, I would say.
Is the Mozilla business model, if you can call it that, is that a viable business model today? Is the open source nonprofit, kind of community collaborative business model something that more companies should be adopting, or is it just not possible?
It is possible, but with caveats. So, for instance, Mozilla started as, I think most people know Mozilla came out of Netscape. So Netscape failed. Key people left Netscape and basically started Mozilla out of the ashes of Netscape. Mozilla was really lucky. It was right before I joined, but essentially the story is that Mozilla was started in a small office in Mountain View, and next door were the offices of Google. And Google was just also starting at the time. And the Google engineers had seen like the original Mozilla Phoenix, like the early beta versions before it was named Firefox. And they really liked what they saw when basically the engineers at Mozilla stripped out everything from Netscape Communicator and made this stripped down fast browser. And so the story is that Sergey Brin and Larry Page walked across the street to Mozilla's offices and met with Mitchell Baker and Brendan Eich at the time and said, "We love the product. How can we help you succeed?" And they created this business model at the time where Google would be featured as the default search, and a fraction of the ads that were shown to the on the search results from those searches would be paid to Mozilla. And I think, just the success of Firefox over the years, well, the initial success of Firefox totally blew everyone away. The expectations, the projections that the Google engineers had, it was multiple times the traffic and the payments. And, I think at one point, I don't know what the numbers are now, but, Google was paying like $300 million plus a year to Mozilla, I think at its height. And that's why Google eventually needed to own its own, to create its own browser and to own its own platform from start to finish, which is why they obviously created the Chrome project and Chrome product and, then Android, et cetera. So it's still, I think, a lucrative product. I think I don't know what the market share is now. It's probably below 10%. So I don't think the numbers are nearly what they used to be, but it's still a business that probably makes, well north of $100 million a year. You really need to have So open source is just like a feature of, I mean, it's a key feature, but it's not why, I mean, it's one of the reasons why people use it, but it's not the only reason why people use it. And so I think open source is not a business model. It's sort of a way of working, and you need to have a business model in addition to just being open source.
Some final thoughts on maybe Japan entry or even Asia entry, if you might.
Yeah, I mean, I would say the calculus is really different now. I would say in the consumer segment, China is really, I really struggle to name any major non-Chinese consumer-facing internet business in China. The only one that I can name at the moment, it would be Airbnb. Airbnb still has a significant China business, but it's unclear how long more that will last. Certainly with COVID, you know, that whole sector is challenged a lot. And I would say, you know, entering China in the internet sector as a consumer-facing business from outside of China is it's probably one of the most difficult challenges in today's in the global market.
You don't include LinkedIn at all? I mean, I'm asking that somewhat naively because maybe they aren't doing as well, and of course I was a foreigner there, but
yeah, I don't know how they're doing. My understanding is that, you know, Chinese people are not, you know, there's a small fraction of Chinese people who probably speak English and maybe have studied overseas who use LinkedIn, but the vast, vast majority, you know, the 800 million plus Chinese users, they're not using LinkedIn.
But I think, and I've heard, and I've been told that their staying power is at least supported by the fact that one thing that LinkedIn did properly was that when they came to China, they rebuilt the product in China for all of the nuances that China has, so that it really was
correct
of
right
playing ball.
Yeah, I mean, it's a whole different. I believe it's a different product. The data, the user data is kept in China, you know, all that sort of thing. So yes, I think that is the case. I would say for Japan, Japan is one of those markets that, as I mentioned before, it can be very lucrative if you are successful. But I think for most companies, it takes a long time to be successful. You know, sales cycles are easily 6 months here in Japan, and a lot of people don't expect that. People expect, 2-month sales cycle or maybe a 3-month sales cycle. But just building those relationships, building the trust. You know, if you're a Japanese company pitching a Japanese company, you know, there's a lot more trust that you have walking into a business meeting versus a Western company, a non-Japanese company pitching a Japanese customer. Just the sales cycles are just much longer in Japan. That said, if you can get good paying customers in Japan, those customers usually will stay much longer with you than a lot of customers would in other markets. So that's the payoff, so to speak, is that profitability should be higher in Japan because Japanese users have the money and do pay for digital services, for software, very low piracy rates, that sort of thing. And then even though sales cycles do take a lot longer, customers will stay with suppliers or service providers for longer than you might expect in comparison to other markets. I think the other challenge that is similar in both China and Japan and certainly other markets is identifying management that you can trust. And that is just such a hard challenge that, you can't, nobody can it's just not something that I can explain in even a 1 or 2 hour podcast. There's just so many different variables, and it's just really hard to find good management that you can trust. The domestic markets in China and Japan have so many options for Japanese or Chinese management that getting them to move to a non-Japanese employer, when, let's say, in the case of it, let's say the management of eBay, they probably left some good job at a Japanese firm to join this startup, and then 2-3 years later they get laid off. That was a significant risk for those employees, and they kind of paid the price for that. And I think that's why it's very, very difficult to find high quality, dual language, experienced managers. Those people are very, very rare, and you have to pay them well to keep them, to find them and to keep them.
Again, thank you so much for coming on the show. This has been an amazing and eye-opening kind of walk through some of the most prominent technological companies that we have in the world today and how they've fared in multiple Asian countries. So thank you very much for coming on the show today. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you for having me, Todd.
Growing a company is hard. Doing it in a foreign market? Exponentially so. The best piece of advice I can give you is not to do it alone. When you start looking across the pond for further expansion possibilities, and I sincerely hope that you do, make sure you choose the right partners to do it with. My good friends at WPIC Marketing and Technologies have almost 20 years of experience helping brands, just like yours, enter China. I hope you enjoyed this episode of The Negotiation, and if you're interested in being a guest or want to connect with me or any of our team, please reach out to us at podcast@wpic.co, and be sure to rate, comment, and subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. Zaijian.